All right. I am here with the incredible Caroline Waterlow, an old friend, and just an amazing.
Still.
What's that?
Who looks really young still.
Who looks really, yes, an old friend from long ago, but we magically don't age. Um, and Caroline is the producer of so many impactful, important, and award winning documentaries. You probably know her because she produced the OJ Made in America documentary, which won the Oscar for Best Documentary. It's an epic, like one of the best documentaries I've ever seen, not just about OJ, but about America and race in America. It's really incredible. And she's done so many other documentaries that have won awards. STAX, which has won a bunch of awards about the music scene in Memphis. The Assassination of Annie Mae, which is an incredible documentary. Just so many award winning documentaries. And I'm so excited to talk with her today. Caroline, welcome.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. I'm excited to talk.
All right. So, um, you're a documentary filmmaker. This podcast is all about culture, how to build the best culture on your team, in your organization, in your friend group, like all the different configurations of culture. And I bet our listeners don't even necessarily know what a documentary film team even looks like. Like who's involved? How many people are there? How do you work together? How long do projects take? Let's just start there and set the foundation.
No, that's a good idea because and also even my own title, producer, nobody really it's a very nebulous title and it means a lot of things. So project literally just starts from being a kernel of an idea or an article you read or a person you meet or, get your ideas from all these different places. And I would say typically it begins with with producer and a director. Or one of those people, and then you bring the other one on fairly quickly. So there's usually the director who is the person with something to say, and through their lens, and the producer comes along and kind of midwifes this creative pregnancy. The process that goes on where you have this idea and you sort of nurture it and you grow it and a lot of what I do is work to execute the vision, right? So, okay, how are we going to do this? How long is it going to take? What are it can be the most minor detail and the most macro detail. In terms of how to get the thing done. And that's building the team to do it. It's figuring out how much the whole thing's going to cost, but all serving the vision and serving the creative that we're trying to achieve. And of course, you have to make a million compromises along the way, right? Because you have a perfect idea of a perfect story, and then it has to intersect the age-old art and commerce thing has to happen, which
Uh-huh.
is hard. And so you have to be pretty clear about what are the things you're willing to compromise on and what are the things you're not, and figure out sort of your boundaries and your guardrails to kind of protect the core thing that you're trying to do. So yeah, it's a really weird job, but I love it. And so yeah, the first, when you do, I guess you can't really build your team until you have some resources. And I would say that's one of the things that just plagues this that's a problem constantly in this world is you work for free for a long time while you figure out how to get the thing made or how to get it in front of HBO or get it in front of
Uh-huh.
so that becomes just a murky, complicated space because certain people care about, I might it's my baby, I'm trying to get the thing made, but I need help finding some great archival. I need a researcher to help me, or and so I can't really expect that person to do that for free and care about it the way I care about it. And so, there's just this constant navigating of the rules of money and who's getting paid, and it's a job, but it's a passion and it's a thing. So it's complicated. So I would say the thing I've learned over the years is just trying to be as direct and honest with people as possible about what they're getting into, and you never quite know. You never know. Is this a 1-year journey or a 3-year journey?
So these are long-term projects. I mean, sometimes that's more time than people stay at a job, right?
Completely, absolutely, absolutely, and so that, becomes fraught with issues too if it takes too long, right?
Yeah.
So I would say from the point of, okay, I have an idea, my colleague and I have developed it, we figured out how to get we convinced Hulu to help us to make it and pay for it, um, and at that point, a lot of what I have to do is assess how long and how much money it will take to make the thing, and I have to, as I build a budget, think about all the people that need to be on the team. And
Mhm.
so, you typically will have a director, a producer, and this is maybe for a feature doc versus a series. Um, I tend to work on historical things that have a lot of archival research. So you have an archival producer, so a producer whose only job is to manage the archival, and that's finding it, licensing it, paying for it, helping the editor work with it, all of that stuff. The editor is very, very, very important role in a documentary. And again, people don't really understand what editors do. um, but they are in some ways writers. Because with documentaries, unlike a scripted film, you gather material, gather material, gather material, you dump it in the bowl, you mix it up, and the editor is the person who's sort of receiving all the ingredients and starting to figure out how much of each thing you need in the story. And they work very closely with the director. Uh,
Yeah. And so you have these teams that kind of get made that you don't necessarily have like a set organizational culture already. So you have to kind of create it for each team. And there are different configurations for each different project. So I feel like it would be super helpful for people to hear in your experience what's worked for creating a culture where everyone feels, valued and safe and creative and safe to be themselves and safe to suggest outlandish things and like the basically what kind of culture is conducive to the best possible collaboration and end product and with people that are feeling cared for in the process. What works?
no biggie. It's a small challenge. Yeah. The thing that I would say, so in all of these roles I've mentioned, there's a sort of 3 or 4 people who are sort of the more senior people, I guess you would say, on the team. And then you also have production assistants and associate producers and a post production PA, or so there's different stages of production, and so there's different roles that come into play, right? There's also crew who are part of the production when you're shooting, and then there's people who are the home base at home receiving material. So and the reason I say that is because it's a very bifurcated process, and so I think the things I've learned from things that have blown up in my face, the problems come when you have too many compartmentalized people, and obviously the working from home thing that's happened since COVID has really exacerbated this. But production inherently has some of that already built into it, because you have people in the field gathering material, you have editors at home receiving, so you have people in different spaces doing different things. So, people can feel isolated very easily. Editors are often locked in an edit room somewhere, and they'll say things like, "Yeah, you didn't get the establishing shot. Like, we need a shot of like, why didn't you do this? Or we really need this shot. You didn't get it." And you're like, um, "Do you have any idea what we were dealing with in the field? I was dealing with a crew that was hungry because the lunch came late, and the people in the so I have dynamics over here that prevented me from doing the thing that this person needed." And so trying to kind of humanize everybody's experience for each other, I think is the thing that I've learned is really important, and keeping people up to date on the wins and the challenges. And if you don't make people feel included and understanding of, the things they have to anticipate, why they have to anticipate them, and if people don't give each other reinforcement constantly and let them see the cut, which is, editors and directors get very protective of the rough cut of the film, but it's like, yeah, but if you don't show the production assistant or the archival producer where it's going, they don't understand how their job is helping the process. It's communication within the team, and it's hard.
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah,
under a lot of time pressure, you know?
and that mirrors what we hear so many times, even in large organizations, where people feel disconnected. They don't know what's happening in a different department. They feel siloed. They don't know what the what the overall picture is or what the impact is. And people want to feel that. They want to feel connected to what is
Right.
happening overall. So a lot of people at different organizations talk about, yeah, I just wish the leaders would fill us in more. Like, what overall, what's the organization doing this week? Where are we headed? How does my work and my department's work impact what we're doing? So it's similar. What other
I mean, it's not rocket science in that way, but, it's amazing what a team dinner can do for the morale and for making people feel like they're all part of a contributing part of a process. And it's a basic thing, and I feel like I just learn it over and over and over again. And it's so true.
Yeah, yeah. So that's exactly what I was going to ask next. Like, what specific things do you do to get that, besides communication, to get that cohesion, that feeling of being on a team, that feeling of inclusion where everyone feels valued and respected and heard and understood?
I mean, it's really hard. I mean, and I don't know that I've perfected it at all. I mean, I know I haven't. And one thing I will say is that every time you make a documentary, there's a point in the middle of it when things are going crazy and things are happening that you didn't plan on and whatever, where there's a point on every film where you say, we should be making a documentary about the making of this documentary. because the things you start engaging in, there's like a meta thing that happens while like all of us making it take on the energy and the issues of the film, and you sort of play them out on your team sometimes. It's quite funny how that happens.
Yeah.
So I mean, the thing that I have been doing that I've learned that I think helps a lot around this is it's quite important when I hire people to understand the culture that they have come from. Right? And I don't mean
Hmm.
their personal life or their family or their, anything like that. I mean the work culture that how did you learn this job? What are the experiences you've had thus far? Because every time I would say every time I have a problem, it's because I say to myself, well, I assumed you knew that. I assumed you understood this process. I assumed and you can't make assumptions like that, and that's always the problem. So trying to understand clearly where everybody is coming from in terms of their level of experience and the kinds of production companies they came from, or the filmmakers they worked with, or are they a film student or not a film student, or like all of those kinds of little things really help me understand um, how to help be successful and productive.
Yeah, that's so interesting what you were saying about the making of the documentary about the making of the documentary. It's fascinating. I was thinking, kind of unrelated to the specifics of our podcast, I wonder, since so many people have seen the OJ documentary, like, can you tell us some of the behind the scenes on that? Like, what would the documentary of the making of that look like?
Right. I mean, that was a film that I would say part of the success of it in the end is a reflection of how kind of fluidly and organically the thing came together, um and the team worked. It was one of those projects that was a little bit lightning in a bottle, that sort of like, for whatever reason, and I have become a lot more like woo woo in my life, in my work life. But I just feel like the universe sort of like opened a portal for that film. There was just a confluence of events that made that film really successful in terms of the larger world and our team and all the rest of it. But yeah, I mean, things like, and you learn that these things that happen that seem terrible when they're happening just push you creatively into a different place. And so you have to just embrace the chaos a little bit and be like, okay, there's a reason that um, for example, the director of the film, Ezra Edelman, one of the people who's most fascinating to him was Chris Darden, right? Who was a Black prosecutor on that team. And he was treated very sort of badly in the press with a lot of racism around it, I would say. Um, and he was trying to he's prosecuting the murderer who he thought was the alleged murderer of this woman who had been dealing with domestic abuse, right? And so he was very pure in his intentions, and then this kind of dynamic took place in the trial, right? So that would be an example of someone who, the director was really, really, really wanted to talk to him, and the film would have been a certain way if he had been a big player to tell his truth for the first time, to tell his experience, and he just basically was like, it's just all too painful. I can't go there. I don't want to go there. And just said, look, I think it's great you guys are making this film, but I'm not going to be a participant. And so that's the kind of thing that happens on a film where you're like, ugh, really upset that a person who you feel like is so interesting to the dynamic of the whole thing, who just, for their reasons, and you have to be respectful. And that's a process too, where you're like, do I keep pushing? Do I take no for an answer? Do I respect this person's boundaries? But maybe we need to convince them a little more that we're the people to be trusted with the story, and and it's also like, you're in the story. I mean, this happens a lot where you're like, you're in it. So we are
Mhm.
going to talk about you, and other people are going to talk about you, whether you want them to or not. or whether, it's just the reality that, like, you're a key player. So, like, your name's gonna come up, you're gonna be in some archival footage, and if you would like to bring your version of the story, your point of view on the thing you experienced and lived, it might be good to do it, to participate. But you also have to respect that people have all kinds of terrible traumas that happen in these events, and they don't wanna relive it, and you have to respect that. So I feel like that's kind of an example of something that maybe pushed the film in a different way, and the director has to pivot and
Yeah.
figure out how to work. You just have to lean in to what is happening and sort of embrace it. I would say overall, people were interested in talking, which was surprised. More people wanted to talk than we thought. And I think because there's a time period that sort of happens where 20 years after something, people they're freer, they don't have that job anymore, they're not running for office, they're not they can reflect more sort of honestly because they're not worried about the impact or blowback. Again, so many things come out of just these human encounters and relationship building, material that you don't think you'll be able to access. Somebody is like, oh, okay, I see who you are now, I see what you're doing, now I trust you. Yeah, here's this trove of photos that I have that no one else has seen, or here's this
Mhm.
um, there was a police officer that we interviewed who had come to OJ Nicole's house, um, called when she called 911 because there was violence in the home, and um, he wrote up the report, and for whatever reason, he kept it.
Mm. Whoa.
A lot of times when you're looking for police reports to corroborate things, they're like, "Oh, yeah, that burned up in a weird storage fire," or like, "Oh, that went missing," or "We've shredded everything from 1970," or
Ye
and this guy was like, just for whatever reason, felt like he knew this was gonna come back at some point and kept it. And so he says, "I don't keep everybody's reports. I don't have drawers full of garage full of reports. I have one report, and this is the report I kept." And it's like, wow, okay. But those things only come from lengthy phone conversations and lengthy relationship building. And yeah, so there's any number of things that happen constantly, just dynamic things that are happening that change, your path all the time. And you have to just be open and flow with it.
Yeah, yeah, and, like, in any business, I mean, stuff happens and you gotta adjust, right? COVID happens and you gotta adjust, or
Exactly.
yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes I talk about how a lot of people think the culture of a team or the culture of an organization is like, what most people do most of the time, but how it's actually better to conceptualize it as the worst thing that happens that we tolerate, that we let go. Like
Interesting.
that sets the culture. And along those lines, I wonder, like, what are some of the worst things you've seen happen or heard about happen in other documentaries that were being made?
Well, I think the for me, sort of one of the biggest sins, I guess, is, the history of documentary, and we've talked about this a little bit, you and I, but like the history of documentary is not great in terms of fetishizing cultures and, very kind of white scientist dominant. Those are the earliest films. It's some British explorer who goes into an indigenous community and is like Nanook of the North, or, you think of those kinds of films. There's this kind of weird othering and dehumanizing that has gone on for a long time, that went on for a long time in documentaries. And so I feel like we've been constantly trying to reconcile that. And so there's been a big movement lately in terms of the ethics of storytelling, the ethics of documentary filmmaking. And so I think for me, if you're going to make a film, no matter whether you're going into a community that's not your own community, or whatever it is. I mean, I worked on a Native American project recently, and was filming in many indigenous communities that I had never been to before. It's not an experience that I had. And for example, but also smaller films I've made where it's like I made a short film about like just a married couple and their life. And so that's not a big community, that's a family I'm going into. So whether it's a family or a community or whatever, um, you need to just be respectful and not engage in what we call parachute filmmaking, right? You can't just parachute into a community or a family or person's life and get what you need and extract what you need and then leave. So there is this kind of a colonial sort of
Yeah.
history almost that's part of this, right? So trying to not do that, I think that is the goal for me, and that is the biggest no. That's where you have to draw the line, which is and it's hard because it means you have to spend more time building relationships. You have to spend more time on the ground. All of which costs more money, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And certainly I try very hard to build teams and crews, specifically when you're filming, that have people who represent the community that you're in. And
Mhm.
you want people in the community to benefit from the project because, Disney's going to benefit, or Hulu or HBO or whoever.
Yeah.
So, so there's that. And figuring out how to make this beneficial to the people in it is
Yeah.
the biggest thing. And it does mean you have to make certain sacrifices. You have to prioritize certain expenses. You have to juggle the business of it around that.
Yeah.
And the networks do have standards and they do have things they want you to achieve, but really it's on you, the team. Legal risk is on you. You're getting people to talk about. You can't pretend you're a therapist when you're interviewing people and get them to talk about their traumas. You have to be careful about that stuff. You have to set those things up carefully, manage people's expectations,
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. So for me, the trying to make sure that the community feels well represented and benefiting in some way.
Yeah.
On our STAX film, which is a doc series, 4-part series, and it's about a record label, and it's about many artists and many people. So it wasn't, it's a record label in a time and a place in Memphis, and there are the artists who run the label, there are the people behind the scenes, there's the, PR person, there's the CEO, the brother and sister who founded the label. So it's a very complicated story. And when the director of that project, Jamila Wignot, who's really really amazing and really sensitive and was really the right person for that film because she's sensitive in the right ways, he, went to scout and meet with some of the artists. And, a lot of the people that you would think, oh, obviously you want to be in this film that's going to celebrate the record label that made you famous, that put your famous song out in 1968 or whatever, and they're like, I never got credit as a writer on that song. And so
Mm.
I don't get residuals. So I'm going to help that label make money reviving a catalog with songs that I don't get any residuals on. Why would I do that? And you're like,
Mhm.
good point.
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
here we are going in like, we're here to celebrate your music and we're here to celebrate this label and this time. And they're like, yeah, there's a lot of like difficult music industry bad business dealings that are like the underbelly of some of this stuff. And
Yeah.
so we have to like acknowledge. And so, a lot of the way to get to encourage people to want to participate is like, okay, you're in your 70s and your 80s, like, here's your time to, like, you set the record straight and, like, say that if you wanna say that and, give people space to talk about the realities. Dealing with the realities of what people's experience are rather than the like, "Oh, yay, we're gonna go, like, celebrate Otis Redding, or we're gonna celebrate Isaac Hayes, and we're gonna" but, like, each one of them has a really complicated story with the ownership of their music, with the all of that. So, being open and not sort of going in with these prescribed ideas. But I was gonna say around the paying of subjects, we basically convinced, the powers that be who were sort of financing and people within the label that we obviously there's no reparations here that we can possibly tackle, but what we can do is acknowledge people's contributions. So anybody who participated, we gave an honorarium. We came up with an
Mm-hmm.
honorarium, which is not a lot of money, but it's a sign of respect. It's showing that you're like, I get it. This is your time. These are your memories. Just acknowledging with respect that what this person is giving us is a real asset for our project. And
Yeah.
so that's something that's kind of like a messy topic in this.
Yeah.
It's like then, David Beckham has a series on Netflix and he got paid $20 million to do it. So
Mm.
like so it's just it's and I'm not advocating or I don't know. I don't know how I feel because it depends on the community, it depends on the person. Does David Beckham need $20 million? Probably not. But
Probably
do
not.
other people living in Memphis who once that label shut down in the 70s didn't necessarily have a lot of opportunity after that, like why shouldn't they be in control of their story and get paid for it? Like so
Yeah.
it's complicated.
Yeah, super complicated. I mean, anyone who hasn't watched that, I would recommend if you're a music fan, even if you're not a music fan, check that out. One of the things I think would be interesting for people to hear also is some of your experiences being in that industry as a woman. Like we've talked about this before. Just what have you experienced? What have you run up against? What are some of the biases that come out?
How do I it's a good way to tackle this. I mean, I think there's just regular old society stuff that's like just exists. For example, I've worked on sports projects, which tend to be pretty male dominated environments. And in certain within certain companies, there's a sort of broy culture that you have to dip into a little bit. And that's something that's, you have to navigate. There's a lot of work as there's a lot of invisible work as a producer that goes unrecognized in the same ways that a lot of women's work goes unrecognized and is invisible, whether it's mothers in the home, homemakers. There's a lot of emotional labor in this job, and that is not so much results oriented. That isn't there isn't like a tangible result to that other than you helped massage a relationship or you helped figure out how to get people to work together or you figured out how to solve a problem with someone who's an interviewee who
Yeah.
bristles at something and you have to go in and sort of be very diplomatic and try to make everyone play nice together. So there's this kind of like maternal thing that happens and you're also like worrying about what everyone's eating and you need to make sure that the crew is fed and so there's like these weird intimate things that you have to do that are like we were sharing an Airbnb, suddenly we're all kind of living in a house together like because that's the cheaper way to do it, and so like that's got its own set of issues. And so I think the experiences I've had are kind of along the lines of what other women in other industries and just the world have, which is there's this invisible work that goes on to nurture and care for people and get them to be able to be their best. And because it doesn't involve a sort of like, well, here's the thing I made and I'm giving it to, we're so deliverables oriented in this industry and in capitalism, right? It's all about production. You made something, you have a product, here it is. And so all this other kind of work that is this like intangible, um, human relations
Yeah.
work doesn't really get recognized.
Yeah, yeah. You're making me think about things that a lot of women talk about in offices where, like, you have a staff lunch and, like, who sticks around to clean up the stuff, right? It's not their job at all, right? Same level in an organization as these men, but it's often women who stick around. Or, pre AI, when it came time to like take notes at a meeting, right? It's not like the men would say, "Hey, I'm not doing it because I'm a man," but
Just
but
don't do it,
miraculously, all of the men would say like, "Oh, I have terrible handwriting,"
right?
you know, like, and
Right.
who would step up to do it, like
Yeah,
those kinds
just
of examples. Um, has it gotten any? Do you feel like that's gotten any better in your years of working in this industry?
I do. I do. I absolutely do. I mean, when I started working in the sort of late 90s, yeah, relative to now, for sure. There's just because I just think things have become less gendered, happily. I mean, there were a handful of female camera people when I started. There was like, "Oh, she's one and she's the other." Like there were, it was like cinematography is very traditionally male, for example. And now there are tons of female cinematographers and it's great. And so I can see it just in the crew people who are available to do things. Um, and there are situations where, as much as I am a believer in, like, I want the right person for the job who's really got the great skill set and whatever, but there are situations where you need a specific gender of person or a specific kind of person to do a job because, for example, I worked on a film about a teenage girl skateboarder, and we filmed her for like 4 or 5 years growing up on camera. So she went from being this kind of phenom at age 12, and we filmed her till she was 17 and went to the Olympics. And so, you're watching this like teen girl grow up. We're like filming in her bedroom. We're filming in her, we're watching her do her hair in the bathroom, and we're all the teen girl milestone things while she's also a successful athlete. It's not appropriate. Like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
have a young woman camera person in the in the bathroom with a 14-year-old girl. Like, that's appropriate. So there are things like that that come up where you really do need all walks of life doing all the different jobs because there's just different, you know, security, safety measures and respect for the people that you're working with and what will make them comfortable.
Yeah. Gosh, you've been able to work on such a wide range of interesting projects and learn so much about different people and time periods. That's just amazing.
You just have to be very open. You have to be very and I think you just have to stay really curious all the time, and just be curious about I'm just interested in people's lives. I also believe in sharing with people in a way that makes you human to them, right? So, like, I worked on a project about PTSD in the military in 2010. And the sort of urgency of that project was, like, at that time, there were soldiers coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan who were then committing suicide. There were more soldiers dying by suicide
Mhm.
than there were dying on the field, from their experience. And so I worked on that film after my own father, like, I had suicide in my family, and it was a really helpful thing to be able to kind of connect with people about. And so while there are sort of professional rules about how much of your own life you share and how intertwined you want to be with people,
Yeah.
but like, how can I ask them to talk to me about the death of their son if I can't be like, look, this is, obviously my experience was not in the military or whatever, but I understand this loss and I understand that you'll never really understand it and you'll have to live with questions for the rest of your life and how hard that is. And like, that so I just sometimes think that connecting with personal experiences of your own can be a good thing, but it's up to you to sort of know when that's appropriate, but I have had that happen.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I mean, thank you for sharing all that. And that's such a powerful strategy for people across the board. Like that idea of sharing first as a way to like build trust, as a way to make people feel safe to share about them, and building trust is so important in any workplace.
Absolutely.
Y-
And also I think certainly with a documentary too, like, we make this assumption, we call people up and say, I'm interested in your story. I'm interested in what's happened to you. I'm interested in your community. Like, will you talk to me? You cannot assume that people really understand what you're making. So that's another thing is making people understand, like, this is the kind. I mean, even like this young teen skateboarder girl I was telling you about, there was a point we had been shooting for like a year or something when she was like, "I don't understand what you're making." And we were like,
Why are you here?
Yeah, I guess she was a little, 'cause it's like, she's 13, 14 years old. She watches 5-minute videos on YouTube. Younger people at that time, this was a few years ago, but like, they consume now much shorter doses of media, right? So the idea of like a 90-minute film or a 2-hour film was just like, that's not what she consumes media wise at all. And so she really was like, I don't understand what you're making. And it was like, oh, okay, we need to stop down for a minute here and like show her an example of the kinds of things we've worked on and let her see some of the footage that we've been filming so
Yeah.
she understands, what we're doing and what it looks like and and that happens a lot where people are like, what are you making? Like,
Yeah.
and we go in with like, well, I make documentaries for HBO and Netflix. Don't you understand? And it's like, no, they don't. Not everybody does. So
Yeah.
that's
Oh
always
my
interesting
gosh.
too.
Are there any stories that come to mind? They're just some of your favorite, wildest stories about like a serendipitous moment or something you learned or like something happened that blew your mind.
Right. Um, yes is the answer. There's actually like a lot of things that happen, things that emerge, and I'm trying to think of a good one for this. The most recent project that was completed, that's on Hulu is something called Vow of Silence: The Assassination of Annie Mae. And it's about Annie Mae Pictou-Aquash, who was a indigenous leader, First Nations Mi'kmaq woman from Nova Scotia who came to the U.S. in the late 60s. Like a lot of people in her community came to Boston for work. And so in that time, there's obviously all the civil rights movement happening and all of the sort of activity of the late 60s, political activity. And there was something called the American Indian movement. The best description is that they were in fact inspired by the Black Panthers. So it's kind of like the indigenous Black Panthers in terms of radical group. If you consider fighting for good housing and jobs or whatever radical,
Right.
and, but they were labeled like a militant radical group by the government, and there was a lot of surveillance of them. And anyway, she became very politically engaged, radicalized, you could say, and joined the movement and
Mm,
decided that that was sort of her calling. And she rose to be a leader and was murdered in 1975.
mm,
And there's been just tremendous mystery around her death for 40 years
mm.
for lots of reasons. And so this was like not a small thing to jump into. It
Yeah.
took 7 years from start to finish, took
Wow.
4 years to develop it before we actually got to start making it. Um, but that is one of those projects that did really feel like, you know, the spirit, her spirit, the spirit of what happened has not rested, right? And
Mm,
it needs to be told. It just sort of was like, it was a project that over that amount of time, so many things happened that really were just like, "Oh my god, I can't believe so there were just things like, and it's really a function of time, like time and just a lot of detail and developing a lot of relationships, and I had, amazing colleagues on that who did incredible work in terms of research and finding people. But so, there was one documentary that had been made about her in 1977 or 78, like right within the time frame of when it happened. So what's so interesting about it is obviously it's the original piece of the story, but there's a whole story that played out over 40 years. So you really couldn't have made a thorough story until now because so much stuff happened. There were like lawsuits and court cases and all these things.
mm,
But the perspective of the people in that moment who were her friends who have just freshly experienced this horrible death, murder,
mm,
and, their emotions are just fresher than they would be if you were interviewing them 30 years later, and their
mhm,
perspectives they're so in the moment and in this American Indian movement, situation. My colleague pursued the filmmaker who had passed away and found the son of the filmmaker of that film from the 70s. And he said, "Oh, yeah, well, we have all the original." Like, so you have the edited film, but obviously when you shoot, you shoot a 3-hour interview and 15 minutes of it ends up in the film, right? So he was like, "Oh yeah, all the full interview reels exist, all the original,
mm. Oh,
all
wow.
the archive from the original making of that film is in an archive in LA. And, so we spent time, and then COVID shut the archive down for a year, and then the thing, we like pursued it, had to spend a lot of money. It's all on film, had to be transferred and scanned and made accessible for digital media now. And anyway, we did all of that stuff. And, it was just this unbelievable trove of material from all the characters in the story, all the players who most of whom have passed now, uh, talking about Annie Mae, talking about, the mystery around her death, talking about all of this stuff. And, that just completely unlocked the film, like just
Yeah.
totally. And that's something that came along kind of 3 years into the process.
Wow. Wow. That's wild.
There's things like that. So just, we were filming in her community where she grew up in Nova Scotia on a reservation, and walking around, and we had built a lot of relationships with people in the community. So there were people with us, sort of vouching for us. And we weren't just we didn't just show up and wander around. We like did a lot of work to make that process, okay for everybody and comfortable. And and this woman, I mean, literally, it was just like walking by a house, and she had had hung up flyer, like a big poster or something about around the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is a big epidemic in a lot of Indigenous communities. And so she came out of her house, and the team who was there told her, like, "Oh, we're working on this project with Annie Mae," and she literally went inside her house and pulled out this beautiful beaded headband that said Mi'kmaq on it, and Micmac, and was like, "I knew Annie Mae. She was a hero.
Mm,
She influenced me. She was like a mentor. She made this for me, and I'm giving it to you." She gave it
wow.
to Annie Mae's daughter, who we were with. And, so just things like that happen.
Yeah. Wow.
Just kind of, and it was really amazing, um, for people even on the crew to be like, "Oh, wow." Who were too young to have remembered who she was, or didn't learn about her in school or whatever, to see that just a random person who was an elder, absolutely knew who she was and had something of hers. And I don't know. So it's just things like that that just
Yeah.
give energy to the project in a way that just makes you take leaps forward. You just have to
Uh,
sort of open to them.
so interesting. I mean, some serious heavy subjects that you've made films about or series about, and some fun, lighthearted things. Are you able to share anything about what you're working on now that people could see in the near future?
Yes, I am working on a project about a really cool woman who had a cable access show in the 80s in New York City. Robin Bird is her name. And if you kind of grew up in New York in the 80s, you are like, "Oh my God, Robin Bird, people know who she is." He is someone who had posed nude in magazines, had been in a couple of porn films, and she was very open sexually. And she had this public access show that talked about sex. And she would invite, people who were strippers or exotic dancers or, artists in their own right onto the show. And she was talking about things that we now take for granted in terms of body positivity and she was openly bisexual, the queer community, all of these things at a time when really nobody else in mainstream media was talking about it. And you have to remember, it's like the 80s, right? So there's like 3 big networks, there's a handful of channels, there's not as much media diversity as we have now in terms of all the ways we consume things. And so there truly was nobody in mainstream media talking about this stuff. And so Robin is a real pioneer,
Mm,
and she was talking about safe sex and AIDS before anybody was really talking about it, in New York
wow.
City, which was a real ground zero for, I mean, San Francisco and New York obviously were big places that AIDS just
Yeah.
ravaged, and it was just a really sad, difficult time. And people in the film talk about how there was a sort of magical time between Stonewall and AIDS,
Mm,
when there was a lot of freedom and a lot of progress. And then when AIDS happened, obviously it was awful and an epidemic, but it gave fuel to conservative people to say, "See, this is why you're being punished for your bad behavior."
mm,
So it fueled a real backlash socially that is also really, was really difficult. And so for people in those communities. And so Anyway, so she's like a
Yeah.
pioneer, and also public access is a thing that, people forget and don't remember, but it was a real experiment in democratizing media, and, it got a little too democratic, so it got shut down. So they started there were, people wanted to control the content of the shows more, and so to have live public access was just, like, too risky.
Yeah.
So
Oh
s
my gosh.
it got sort of phased out, and so, Robin is now 70 and just amazing, and so it's kind of celebrating, what she did.
Oh, that sounds incredible. Where is that gonna be? Do you know yet?
Will be on HBO, yes, eventually. We don't know, exactly what the air date is, but sometime next year in 2026, I think you'll see it pop
All
up.
right, put it on your calendars,
Yeah.
folks. Um, Caroline, this has been amazing talking with you. And so much we can learn from different industries and different cultures and different interactions. And besides all of the like interesting historical stories and tidbits that you've shared, where can people learn more about you, find out more about your documentaries, all of them, so people can go watch?
Well, it's, IMDb is a great is a great
Yeah.
resource in terms of, when you have a filmmaker that you're interested in and, people who you think make good things, and you can go to IMDb, Internet Movie Database, and look up directors and producers and editors and cinematographers, and, it's kind of a great way actually if you find a film you like or a documentary you like to just go dig deep on the full sort of repertoire of, particular filmmakers. Um I did have thoughts about 2 films, not of mine, that I think are really if you're interested in documentaries and sort of the dynamics of making them, there's 2 really interesting films that I think are worth watching. One is called Camera Person, and it's made by this woman Kirsten Johnson. She directed it. She's just an amazing human, and she's a person working very much in the space of trying to diversify filmmaking and empower young people, and she's just a real force of nature.
Wow.
And prior to being a director, she was a camera person for a long time, and she's one of these women I was saying was like she was one of the sort of 2 or 3 female camera people who were around kind of in the 80s and 90s, and so she made a film that's basically tries to explain sort of what her experience as a camera person is and what it is to be behind the lens, and when are you supposed to come out from behind the lens and when are you not, when are you supposed to stay quiet, when are you
Uh,
supposed to intervene, when you're filming something that's dangerous or difficult or a war zone or whatever, like, at what point do you put the camera down and help? At what point do you keep what is your role in your job, to be impartial or partial? So that's a really interesting beautiful film, so it's almost like it's outtakes from all the films she ever worked on, and it's
wow.
really beautifully done and beautifully edited, and then there was a film that came out, I think 3 years ago, that's really interesting called Subject,
Uh,
and it is about the ethics of kind of documentary filmmaking, and even the language that we use while we're making them, right? So, I try very hard not to ever call someone in my film a subject, right? It's very dehumanizing. And that's language that gets used all the time. We're like, "Oh, the subject, the subject, the subject," and you're like, "The subject is a person named Julie, okay? That's a human with a name and a thing." And so I think that anyway, so it was a very good film made about, like, following up with people who had been in documentaries and how it had impacted their life for better or for worse. And then a big trend now in Hollywood is to get inspiration for stories from documentaries and then make scripted versions of them. And so what they call the sort of, derivative rights on a project, when you own the rights on a project, there's derivative rights to make it into other things. And so there are people but again, it's like, yeah, that's someone's life, that you're now gonna fictionalize some parts of, but you're gonna really highlight and people don't have a lot of say in it if it gets done that way. So anyway, that's a film that I think is really, really interesting called Subject, and I believe that's on Amazon.
okay,
So I would
awesome.
recommend that. Just and I think a lot of this is a what we're all wrestling with right now is media literacy, right? It's just like being aware when you're watching something, like who made it, who got paid, who just the story of how these things get made is important, and the perspective of the people making them, is important.
And people might not think about that at all, right? It's you
Mm,
sit down, you watch something for an hour and a half, and don't even think about that stuff or realize that it took 7 years to make that thing.
exactly, exactly, and yeah, I think it's just always trying to remember that, like, nothing happens by accident in a film, right? We measure everything carefully, right? So there's a reason that shot is in there for 3 seconds and not 5 seconds. There's a reason that that piece of archival is there. There's a reason. So these things aren't just, like, happenstance. Like, everything is purposeful. An edit is a choice, right? That's what at the end of a film, you have something called the EDL, the edit decision list, right? And the edit decision list is sort of like the list of the shots in the order that they come, but those were all decisions
Yeah.
that somebody made. So I think it's like just a matter of being mindful about that,
Yeah.
when you're watching things, when you're consuming things.
Yeah, cool. And thank you for giving people 2 things to check out.
Really?
So I love giving people optional homework assignments. So now you've got your optional homework assignment
Exactly.
to keep learning, to keep being inspired by these incredible guests that we have on the show. So, Caroline, thank you so, so much. It's just wonderful to hear about you and the thought behind some of these amazing documentaries and the industry at large. So thank you for being
I
here.
am very honored to be here, and, obviously, it's fun to see where we have both ended up in our
Yeah.
of work and life, and I think it's just really important what you're doing, and I think people don't think enough about culture and don't think enough about creating environments for people to do their best, and, we get so caught up in time and money always, I think. And usually when things have gone badly for me, it's just because of time. It's because I didn't take the time to ask the right question, or I didn't take the time to check on how this person was doing, or I didn't take the time. It's always, always, always about that. And so I think people are afraid also of, like, admitting when something's wrong, and or saying, like, "Yeah, I messed that up. That was a bad decision. Like, sorry." So
Yes.
I think a lot can come of that, but people are so afraid of taking responsibility for their mistakes. Uh, and, and and so I think you can do a lot by apologizing. You can do a lot by just communicating and being transparent, and also just making people understand where you're coming from. And I just think we can solve a lot of these problems, actually.
Yeah, super practical tips you just laid out. And slowing down big decisions, right? And asking, okay,
I'm
who's
curious.
not here? Whose voice are we not hearing? Right? What biases might be getting in the way of this decision that
Mhm.
will save you time in the long run? A-
Absolutely.
And for leaders, admitting that you don't have all the answers and when you mess up.
Yeah, I think so, and I think one thing I have to say about my mother, that one of the, like, super practical life things that she gave me that has served me in my work really well, and I remember at the time being so annoyed, but she's so right, is, like, she was really uptight about, thank you notes, and, like, writing people thank you notes for Christmas gifts or whatever, whatever, and I just think a lot, just taking time, and again, I've screwed this up at times because I just felt rushed, or I didn't have to whatever, but just taking time to make people aware of their contributions and saying thank you goes, like, a really long way.
Yeah.
Being
Well, and I
well,
can for sure, and I can attest for people that you are one of the few people that actually do that. You do that kind of
I try.
connecting. You are probably one of the only people that I regularly get postcards from when you're in different places, and that means so much. So you actually follow through with what you're talking
I
about.
mean, I try, I try. I don't always succeed, but yeah, I think, just, yeah, reaching out to people always can solve a lot
Yeah.
of things. So,
Amazing. All right. Thank you so much for being here.
thank you for having me. Bye.
All right.